Alrighty. Hello everybody. Welcome back. Hopefully you got a little bit of a refresh, a popcorn or a coffee or something like that. So we are going to spend the next 20-25 minutes talking about LoRA, which is actually a pretty big deal. So if I was to sort of think about one of the big takeaways from TC3 so far this year, it's that IoT is starting to become a pretty big deal. We're starting to see some pretty significant deployments, a lot of money being invested. I would probably estimate that 30 to 40% of the meetings here at the show have to do with IoT in some shape or form. And so one of the things that has sort of started to become an important part of the landscape is what are the networks going to be that are going to support some of these IoT devices. Well, I have a funny quote from you. It came out of somebody, it's not myself, so I wish it was clever, that came out of CTIA. So it said, well, we're going to have, I think it was 20 billion connected devices by 2020 for IoT. Well, we still have about 19.5 billion to go as of the end of 2016. So lots of growth to go, but I mean, I think this is an emerging area. And LoRa networks are going to be part of what powers these billions of devices on the network. So this is really this session is really an introduction to LoRa and IoT connectivity. So how are we going to power all of these low power, relatively low bandwidth consuming devices with a business model that works? And so for that presentation today, or for this session, we have Christos Kolias, who is the principal research scientist for Orange, which is involved in the LoRa Alliance and has been involved in building its own LoRa network or networks, and we'll hear more about that. And then Hardy Schmidbauer, who is the VP for Wireless and Internet Development at Semtech, but is representing, for the purposes of this session, the LoRa Alliance. We'll hear a little bit more about that. So I think you'll find this really interesting. We'll leave some time at the end for some Q&A, but why don't we have Christos kick this.
There's like 3 L's. And I'm coming from a network background, but I was so much fascinated by what LoRa can enable and achieve in this space. Orange is deploying actually LoRa and IoT in France as we speak. And also, full disclosure here, we have invested into a company and a startup called Actility, along with other operators, I believe Swisscom and KPN. So we see LoRa as a way for certain applications in IoT. It's not going to be for every application. We don't see LoRa competing directly with any of the other LTE-based or narrowband IoT technologies. But we think there's a lot of benefits that we can reach with LoRa.
So maybe you could just give us a quick 30 seconds on, like, what does a LoRa network look like compared to what we might think of as like a cellular network, for example? What enables it to power those long-range devices with the requirements that they have and do it in a cost-effective manner?
Yeah, so to me it looks like more like a Wi-Fi type network, but outside your Wi-Fi type of environment. Actually, we do have a LoRa network in our office in San Francisco with an antenna on the ceiling, on the roof of our building actually. And in terms of range, because this is the kind of question that people ask, it varies a lot. So if it's like sort of like an open space type of situation, then you can it can reach even to 30 miles. I've seen reports that it can go to 30 miles in terms of range.
Right.
It's a very low cost, as I said. The actual gateways. So you have the sensors, which are the endpoints or end devices. These are connected to a gateway, and for the gateway, for the backhaul, you can use cellular, or you can use Ethernet, whatever any connectivity you can choose. And so the gateways actually look like small Wi-Fi, essentially boxes, like as small access points. And that's pretty it. And these are very, very cheap. Actually, we're working with a company called Multitech, they're building these gateways. We're talking about like $400 to $700.
Right, if you compare that to like a cellular network where one of the cellular providers needs literally hundreds, if not even thousands of base stations to cover one major city, and compare it to a LoRa network, that's where sort of the cost model comes in. So Hardy, tell us a little bit about Semtech maybe and the LoRa Alliance.
Sure, I'm Hardy Schmidbauer. I was previously the director at Semtech, where we developed the LoRa technology originally. I just left to start a new company developing LoRa solutions around really low-cost Wi-Fi plus LoRa gateways. That are those gateways are less than $100. So you can really do, say, high volume of those type of gateways and those solutions to improve your network coverage and get your network out there. I'm regional chairman for the LoRa Alliance still. When we were started to set up the LoRa Alliance, we realized that an ecosystem and standardization are really key to scaling and enabling these IoT applications. So the LoRa Alliance is really set up to do that, to make sure that there's interoperability between all these networks and all these products, so that if you develop a product for Orange, it'll also work in the Swisscom network, in the SKT network, and all these other networks that are being deployed around the globe. In less than 2 years of the LoRa Alliance, we have more than 450 members in the Alliance. We should easily be over 500 members by the end of this year. We add about 5 to 10 companies a week into the Alliance. And there's big names as Cisco, IBM, Samsung that are in the Alliance, but also a very nice playing field for new startups and companies that are trying to develop new solutions and enter into the IoT space.
Right, and if I'm remembering correctly, there are two different slices of spectrum over which LoRa is being deployed. There's one in Europe primarily, and then there's one in North America / Asia, right?
So yeah, as you actually mentioned that we LoRa operates in the ISM band,
right,
which stands for industry, science, and medical. And so in Europe, it's 867 to 869 megahertz. In the US, it's between 902 and 928 megahertz, so it's roughly 915.
Yeah.
And in Asia, is similar to Europe, so different frequencies. And I believe like some companies are thinking of coming up with a product with sensors that actually can do both bands, and obviously the gateways as well. So yeah.
And where are we now with LoRa? You talked about the number of companies who are members, and that's clearly there's a lot of momentum there. But how many operational LoRa networks are there now approximately worldwide, would you say?
Yeah, there's been 25 announcements of major intention to deploy nationwide networks, a lot of them by major telcos like Orange. Also some utilities such as E.ON in Germany have announced that they're going to deploy a network. The nice thing about LoRa is you can do these public type of IoT networks, or you can also do enterprise-based private solutions as well. So, you know, Semtech really started out by doing the enterprise kind of private solutions, and it's migrated into this kind of public space, which I think is more attractive for everybody because it lowers the cost of connectivity for a number of applications, not just for one. So we're really just in the rollout phase of these networks, but there's definitely been a big investment into rolling out these networks, which are occurring at the moment.
And what does it mean? Like, okay, so if you want to do a LoRa network or have a LoRa certified device, right? So what does that entail, right? So if you want to sort of play in this territory, what does it mean?
Yeah, so the specification is open. You can actually go to the LoRa Alliance website, download the specification. The Alliance is offering as well certification, so that you can certify your end product to be LoRaWAN compliant, and then the operators know that it can easily plug into their network and be part of their deployment.
Okay. And there are also there are alternatives to LoRa for IoT. There's a couple of competing, it's almost standards. It's almost like the GSM versus CDMA or Sony versus Betamax sort of thing going on. So, and then the carriers themselves, some of them, have their own IoT networks. They're trying to adapt or adapt their networks to a certain extent to accommodate IoT. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about sort of where does LoRa fit within that landscape? What are sort of the advantages of LoRa compared to the alternatives?
Right. So as I said, you know, we don't see LoRa as competing directly with other alternatives out there. There are like some LoRa-like type of technologies, like the ones from Sigfox and Genu. I don't know whether that's what you meant, but
Yes.
so in terms of
Sigfox being one of them, yeah, big
right.
one.
But they're building their own network. They have a lot of capital to do that. It's very capital intensive, of course, if you want to build your own network around the world. We decided to, go with LoRa, and we're members of the LoRa Alliance as of April.
Right.
And by the way, Semtech is the major semiconductor in the LoRa space, sort of like the Intel of LoRa, if you like. And so we don't see again direct competition with the LT-based deployments or applications, but definitely Sigfox is something that we're watching out for. And we, again, as I said, we build a LoRa network in France. We're deploying that. We collaborate with companies and providers here in the US, like Senet. Senet is another service provider of LoRa. But we think that we believe in an open sort of type of specifications. That's very important for us. There's a lot of members, like more than 300 members in the LoRa Alliance.
Yeah.
So building a strong ecosystem is what's really most important to us.
I was going to ask actually. So where are we at least in North America with LoRa? Are there any? There are a couple of networks that are operational, at least with a few markets. Nothing national yet, but certainly with some national aspirations. But maybe you could just give us a quick snapshot of what's here in North America so far for LoRa.
Yeah, I would say, LoRa's been lagging a little bit, I would say, some of the other geographies, so Europe and Asia. It's catching up quickly. There's a few companies like Senet who have been deploying networks here. I think you'll see a lot more announcements and a lot more, traction in the US market over the next couple months. And that's not public quite yet, but I think you're going to see a lot more interest and traction in the US market.
Yeah. And are you seeing where the LoRa networks are deployed in different parts of the world? Are there a couple of leading verticals within IoT where you're seeing a lot of adoption?
Right. So in one particular area that I'm working in is agriculture. So we think that it's a great fit for agricultural applications, especially because maybe there's not cellular coverage in certain places. And so we think it's great potential for this type of applications. We're looking into asset management and fleet tracking type of application now that geolocation has been enabled with LoRa. This was ratified a couple of months ago, maybe 3 months ago, and geofencing and geolocation. So we're looking at industrial applications, but also there are a lot of consumer applications, especially like in the smart cities or smart buildings type of environment. There's a company that we work with, it's called Sutro. That's for essentially using sensors in the pool to measure the pH and other metrics. So there's definitely some consumer applications. You can use, there's an interesting application I saw at the CTIA where we're demonstrating with Multitech in sports and particularly in golf. Oh. So they're using LoRa to track the golfers and get some analytics out of their performance. So that's kind of interesting. So to me, it's going to be certain niche applications, if you like, where LoRa is going to play a big role, but also going to be other mainstream type of applications as agriculture, as I mentioned.
Yeah, I see three main, application areas in every network deployment that's happening. One is agriculture, as Christoph mentioned.
Agriculture, yeah.
The other one is supply chain. A lot of, supply chain is it empty, full, managing that inventory and tracking of assets. And I really view what's going to be the killer app of LP1 is going to be low-cost asset tracking. I think LoRa can do that better and more cheaply than any other technology out there. And the third one, which is quite common, is intelligent building and property management. There's see a lot of applications in that space as well.
So let's just explore one of those just for a second. Low-cost asset tracking. What does a device look like from that standpoint? What are the maximum sort of power requirements, network connectivity requirements? So maybe you could just sort of give us a dimension, because we all sort of think about the cellular and smartphone world that we're accustomed to, device that emits this amount of power and consumes gigabytes of data a month. So in an IoT world, we talk about low-cost asset tracking. What is a typical sort of power requirement of a device? What is a typical consumption of a LoRa LoRa-enabled or LoRa-centric type device? Just give us a bit of a sense of what that looks like.
Sure. So I mean, LoRa, the advantage is low cost, long battery life connectivity. I think it can do that better than any other technology. So you need to be able to know the location of a pallet, and you put that sensor on there, and it needs to stay on there for 5+ kind of years. I mean, LoRa can, I think, do that better than other technologies. But where I really view the market going is on even disposable tags with disposable batteries that are 50 cents or sub $1 that you put on packages or other assets and you just throw away at the end of the day. We're already starting to work on those type of applications as well.
So that's where we're talking about, for example, devices that consume, whose batteries last for a year plus, or devices whose data consumption is, tens of kilobytes a month, right? That's sort of what we would call a typical LoRa type device.
Yeah, in a typical asset tracking, application, there's typically not a lot of data that's being transmitted, right? It's a location and maybe some temperature or a few other bytes of data that are transmitted. And where
some of the wireless carriers are supporting LoRa or are members of the alliance, or you've got companies like Orange, for example. But then, where do some of the other larger operators sit right now vis-a-vis IoT network connectivity and LoRa? Are they sort of looking at this? Do they offer a competing solution, but one whose cost structure isn't quite there? Where does that sit right now, in your opinion?
So the landscape is a little bit different obviously in the US versus Europe. It's sort of like the market case logging versus compared to Europe. So, but we see a lot of interest, and I believe, as Hardy mentioned, that I think a major operator will announce some LoRa, some activity around LoRa. And I know that like other companies are looking into narrowband IoT. Maybe they're looking at LoRa. We don't know what's happening, obviously, within those operators. I guess it's because of the lack of infrastructure at this point. As you know, you need some capital to build that infrastructure. So maybe they're a little bit reluctant doing that until the dust settles somehow around LoRa. Yeah. But I think it's going to get more momentum in the US.
I guess one of the challenges in the U.S. might be just the density. It's a huge geography. You think about what it takes to build a LoRa network in certain European countries, for example, and you can cover a critical mass of the population and the geography at a lower cost.
That's another advantage, right? Because it's sort of like a uniform type of connectivity mode. So if you set up a network in San Francisco and one in New York, it's going to be the same frequency. Right. You don't have to change providers. It's going to be one big network essentially. Yeah. So,
I was just going to say, I think that's one of the key advantages of LoRa is that you can have a hybrid-based deployment model. You don't have to, deploy the network 100% on towers. You can put, gateways and very low-cost ones in-home and in-building to, lower the number of towers that you need, so it lowers the CapEx and the OpEx of a network deployment.
But you do want a height of some sort, typically, right?
Well, I mean, you're going to get the best range and the best coverage of that. But, putting things up on the towers in the U.S. market is very expensive. You may be in a better option to put up 10 lower cost gateways. Right. Maybe they have less coverage of that one tower, but it's a lower CapEx and a lower OpEx.
No, the tower point is interesting because I actually got a question the other day from one of the big tower companies in the US. Say, well, how do we participate in IoT? We hear this LoRa thing is coming along. I say, well, if you stop charging $1,000 a month, to accommodate a gateway, that might be one way of participating in IoT. I mean, are the tower companies sort of participating here? Are they starting to adapt their business models, in your opinion?
So far, we haven't seen a lot of interest in the tower companies in LoRa. I think they're making very good revenue from the operators and the carriers.
Yeah, it's a business model they like.
So far, they haven't been willing to lower that monthly fee for antenna for some of these LP1 connectivity options.
Yeah. And where are we with chipsets right now for LoRa devices?
So Semtech was the main chip provider who originally developed the LoRa technology. Semtech is licensed to Microchip and to ST as well. So there's not a single provider. Now you can get the chips from multiple different companies. You're starting to see a lot of really integrated low-cost modules starting to become available on the market as well. You know, Murata really announced a really low-cost. Semtech announced another very small integrated low-cost module as well.
Great. So we have about 3 or 4 minutes left. Questions about LoRa or about maybe IoT more broadly? Who has questions? We have somebody with a microphone. Yes.
That you don't have competitors for LoRa, but you've got alternatives. Can you touch a little bit on NB-IoT and how that fits in the landscape?
Sure. I just wrote a paper on how LoRa compares to NB-IoT. You can find it on the LoRa Alliance website. But I view LoRa as really going to be, since it's deployed in the ISM bands, we can have, you know, very low cost, different deployment models. I think you're going to see LoRa for the higher volume, lower cost applications. You're going to see narrowband IoT at the applications that are typically a little higher price that need a higher quality of service. To me, they serve different applications. They're not really competing against the same application. So, you know, for things like asset tracking or agriculture, I think LoRa makes sense. But if you're talking, you know, point of sale terminals, I think, you know, narrowband IoT makes sense, not LoRa. So to me, they're completely different applications and probably price points and segmentation from the operator's standpoint.
Yeah, I think one of the themes coming out of this is that it's not like we're competing with two different sort of technology sort of philosophies. It's more around different business models and cost structures and consumption patterns, because, you know, a LoRa device is going to be much less, is going to last longer, but also is going to be much less consumptive of data than a device for narrowband IoT, which will look sort of maybe somewhere in between what we might see from a cellular-centric module today and an IoT-centric module. So, other questions? All right, so maybe we can close this out with, you could each, you know, maybe spend a minute or two on what does the roadmap look like for both for LoRa, but just, you know, in general on IoT, what are you sort of excited about? What might we be talking about, you know, a year from now at this show if we're talking about IoT? What does the next 6 months to a year look like in terms of the IoT roadmap? Go ahead, please.
So I'm starting to see in geolocation type of applications. Actually, we are hosting an event in November in our office in San Francisco. If you guys want to find out a little bit more about LoRa and you want to be involved and engage with us, we're looking for folks that can develop applications based on LoRa, not necessarily for Orange, but to work together. We're trying to build this ecosystem, and as I mentioned before, building this ecosystem is very, very important for LoRa. So that's what I think in terms of roadmap. And you know, if you're interested, you can come and talk to me after we're done here.
And so from the Alliance perspective, the next Alliance meeting is hosted by SKT in Korea in a couple weeks. So I think if you're interested in the Alliance and interacting with some of the members, attending that event in Korea is a very good, you know, place to start. Just to plug my new company a bit, you know, we are developing LoRa solutions around really low-cost gateways to go after the consumer, home, and health market. So if you are deploying a LoRa network and you're interested in say, low-cost deployment and getting volume of gateways out there in different model than the tower model, I'd love to speak with you as well.
Yeah. So if I was to throw in sort of an analyst comment on this, it looks like in 2016 it was sort of like a tipping point year for IoT. If you look at the commitments being made by the major, you know, operators around resources and building up their teams, if you look at the deployments of various types of networks for IoT, including quite a bit of momentum from LoRa in terms of the number of companies participating and the networks that are going up, but then also, you know, 3 or 4 particular verticals that seem to have kind of sort of catching fire in terms of the deployments. You know, a lot of activity around smart cities, a lot of activity around telematics. Agriculture seems to be emerging as a really interesting one as well. So, you know, I think it's really a very different discussion than we were having a year ago, where people were sort of a bit skeptical about this. And it is true that IoT is a tough one to frame, because each of those sectors, you look at about the 6 or 7 principal sectors of IoT, each of them has sort of its own ecosystem, so to speak. But it really looks like this is a year where there's some significant dollars being spent in solutions that are coming out there. At least that's my read from sort of an analyst perspective. So any sort of concluding thoughts?
No, I agree with you. I think this is really the year of IoT and LP1 deployments is really going to be 2016, 2017. I think it's going to be a very interesting year in that space for IoT and LP1.
Yeah, so as I said, come and talk to us after the interview here. I'll be more than happy to share information with you.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate everybody's attendance, and thank you very much. It was a good session. Thank you.